Hello and welcome to the show. Now, silhouette race cars are a really rather fascinating thing. Essentially, it boils down to they must bear some resemblance to a road-going version of a car. However, kind of fundamental mechanics can be different engines, different chassis, suspension, drivelines, and so on and so forth. Perhaps one of the most extreme examples being the Group 5 cars, vehicles like this Zaxpeed Capri. The Group 5 rules said that the cars had to have the bonnet, the roof, and the doors from the road car, and that was about it. I think they had to have something from the underside as well, but that was pretty much it, which gives you large free rein to design the ultimate race car. There were rules on the width of the vehicle, however, everybody managed to kind of skirt around them by adding huge body kits that technically didn't Everyone found loopholes at this time, and the cars that came out were ludicrous, insanely light. This Capri, for example, 1,900 pounds, doesn't look much like a Capri, but there we go, powered by almost a 500 horsepower engine. The Lancia Beta that raced in this category, 1,700 pounds with over 400 horsepower. Those are monstrous power-to-weight ratio figures. However, what might a modern-day Group 5 category look like? Well, we immediately run into a problem, and that problem is, well, weight. You see, silhouette cars bear some resemblance to the road-going vehicles, but are essentially built, from the ground up, and that isn't something that we can do on Forza. It's just not something we can do. We can't possibly strip enough weight out of the road cars that we have in the game, the modern road cars that we have in the game, to even possibly get them close to the sorts of weights that the Capri and the Lancia and so on could do. Cars like this Lotus 311, for example. This is an ultra-lightweight, completely track-orientated modern car, and it weighs 2,100 pounds. Now that's light, and with race weight reduction I can get it down to about 1,800, but there would be about 3 cars that could possibly get down to that sort of weight, and none of them would be the sort of cars, the sort of the Group 5 cars. It's just something that we can't do in Forza. It's a shame, but it isn't something that we can do. So the minimum weight for this class was going to be 3,200 pounds. Yes, that is quite high, but it's the best that we could manage, and it's something that all of the cars that we were going to be using would be able to get down and hopefully, or get to, and hopefully make it as competitive between the vehicles as possible. The good news in all of this is while we couldn't get the weights down to the sort of levels that I wanted to, we could at least get the appearance roughly correct. This was the Mercedes that I was going to be running, and this is the Forza edition of the car, and as you can see, it is very wide. It has many fancy aero things, from a huge diffuser at the back, a massive wing, huge canards at the side, and a big old splitter at the front. It at least looks the part. You see, the Forza edition cars, the special edition cars that can be found in Forza 7, some of those come with unique body kits that make the cars pretty damn extreme, and this would generate at least the look of the vehicles. Power-wise, well, the cars were to be built to S-Class. They were on race tyres. It was 315s for the rears and I believe 295s at the front. A couple of cars we had to tweak a little bit to allow them into the category because we didn't have that many to play around with. So yeah, I had to tweak some rules a little bit, but that was the general basic rules. And up in S-Class, well, cars like my Mercedes were getting some 800 horsepower. Maybe not quite the power-to-weight ratio of the Capri or the Lancia, but still pretty damn good going. Some cars a little bit less powerful, but likely to be better through the corners. The race now would take place at the Catalunya full circuit, and as we headed into qualifying, one thing became quite clear. The Mustangs were damn fast. This, the Forza edition of the Shelby GT350R, was the car that would get on to pole. Now, the Fords didn't have the greatest straight line speed, but it was their cornering ability. The GT350R is a fantastic, fantastic car, in standard road-going guise to drive when it comes to the corners, but this version was an absolute monster. And it would be a good day for Ford. As the front row, that would be all Mustangs, with another one in second place. Their straight line speed wasn't the fastest in this field, that much was for sure. However, when they could carry as much corner speed as they did, then yeah, they were going to be a serious contender in all of this. Now, when we go back into a third place on the grid, then we have pretty much the polar opposite. Now, this in GTR would get into third. Now, the rules for this, all of the cars had to be made rear-wheel drive. As far as I'm aware, all of the Group 5 cars were, so for this, we were sticking with having to keep everything rear-wheel drive. So the GTRs would have to be converted. Unfortunately, the Forza Edition doesn't allow you to convert the cars to rear drive. We had to run the normal version of the GTR. Thankfully, the wide body kit that you can get on the car is the same as the Forza Edition. So you can still have the correct look, the massive wing and so on, and it is all in there. And GTRs would not just get third, they'd also lock out the second row. These were some of the fastest cars in terms of straight line speed. They were very difficult to drive, apparently. They were not the most cooperative at low speed. Getting traction out of some of the slower corners around here wasn't that easy with them, but they were very quick once you did get the power down. And in fifth place, we would have a Mercedes. Not my Mercedes, though. My Mercedes was pretty garbage. You see, I didn't swap the engine in my car, and perhaps in hindsight I should have restricted engine swaps a bit more. However, swapping in the twin-turbo V12 was the way to go. As, yeah, this Mercedes, far quicker than mine, would end up in fifth place on the grid. A very, very good showing from that car. There'd be Camaros and Maseratis further back. So we move on to race time, and it would be the Nissans with an absolutely blinding start. The Mustang in second got a lot of wheel speed, a big wiggle away from the line for him, run down towards turn one. It would already be one of the GTRs leading the way. It's almost four wide into the first corner. Mercedes try to sneak up the inside there and get a whole heap of positions. The Mustangs come together. The blue car coming off worst. The red vehicle would dive out of the traffic to wait for the car that he gave the slightest of taps to, and that would be both the front row Mustangs plummeting down towards the back of the order. This GTR also not having fared the best off of the line. Started in fourth, but got stuck on the outside, just not able to keep the positions, and M4 would be up into third. A couple of Camaros behind that. Now it's a Maserati having a look around the outside as the Nissan tries to find a way to sneak past the Chevrolet. There's just not quite any space to get that move done. The Maserati thinking about having a dive up the inside. Difficult place to get overtakes done. It's a tough corner at the best of times through there. Going too wide is yeah, a tad scary. You can see the speed of the GTR when it gets a good run up the hill. In a very, very close look at the back of a Camaro, although everybody making it around there okay. The Nissan trying to size up that Chevrolet for an overtaking attempt into the hairpin, but isn't quite close enough. Doesn't quite trust the brakes on the Nissan, although the Chevy runs a bit too deep. Not quite as deep as my Mercedes further back, as the GTR would get a better exit, but then stuck trying to go the long way round. And the Chevy's grip just a little bit too much for that GTR. Still the Maserati right in there behind. There was another Maserati behind that, and a Ford that had a poor qualifying session further back as we head into the tight chicanes for the first time. It's difficult to get overtakes done at the best of times through there, let alone in high-powered, very, very wide cars. That Nissan proving to still be a little bit difficult on these cold tyres, very wide through the final corner. It might have good straight line speed, but a poor exit onto this main straight will hurt. And the Maserati has got plenty of straight line speed as well as they head down towards the first corner. The Nissan defends well, though, into here. There are ways to get around the outside there, but the Maserati hasn't got quite the speed or the grip to get a pass done at this time, while the two Camaros would enjoy a respite from the GTR attack. Now, the two Mustangs that had got into trouble at the first corner had recovered and were, well, going rather bloody quickly. They were always likely to carve their way up through the order, and it wouldn't be very long whatsoever until they caught back up to the rear of the train of cars, and at that rear would be, well, my rather struggling Mercedes. The Mercedes was not too bad when it came to the straights. However, through the corners, my one was, struggling slightly. And, well, the Mustangs would be able to pick it off. Not before they had a good little fight themselves. The red car firing up the inside at turn 4, able to get that pass to stick, although when you do that, you tend to end up on the outside for the next turn. Not that that was a bother for the car. It's around the outside of my Mercedes, who would have the drive off of the turn to keep the position. Now the blue car would be lining up to have a look at trying to find a way past. Can't quite get it on the way into the next corner. As we exit up the hill, there's a little bit of a wobble from my Mercedes, but still some decent enough acceleration around the top of the hill, though again that Mustang can carry so much more speed. He's right on the right on the ragged edge. You put a wheel in the sand over there and you're in an awful lot of trouble, but he managed to just tread that very fine line. It's up the inside into the hairpin, although big wheel spin out of the corner gives the Mercedes half a chance. But again, the Mustang has got that grip. The Ford can go all the way around the outside of the next corner. The big bends with not too much that it can do at that moment in time. Now, this race would feature one mandatory pit stop. Okay, it was a fairly short race, this one. The cars wouldn't technically need it, but for a little bit of added intrigue, a little bit of added tactical decisions and so on, thought we would give it a go. Now, the lead GTR had got a decent margin. It wasn't the most comfortable, but was out in front. Decided to pit as soon as the pit window opened. So as we came around to the end of lap number 2, the Nissan would jump in the pits. That would give the Mercedes the lead. A couple of other cars would follow the GTR in. Now, the plan being is that if you can pit early, the field is still relatively close together as you see them all soaring past. The GTR should be dropped out into relatively clean air and not worry about catching up to the pack for quite some time. This plan does fall apart if too many cars come in with you. You end up out in clear air battling one another. However, luckily for the Nissan, he was going to be dropped out. He had a fair gap over the other cars that came in with him, so he would be dumped out into clean air and nobody to worry about battling with. So, with the GTR having pitted, a Camaro would move up into third place, close by to a BMW. The M4 was currently holding that second place, although a big wide moment into turn 4 would put him under plenty of pressure from that Chevy. The BMW, perhaps one of the tamest of the looking cars in all of this, and that is saying something with the collection of crazy cars that we've got going on. The Chevrolet able to get that power down as they run up towards the top of the hill, but not quite close enough to get anything done at this moment. Behind, there was another Camaro, a Mustang, with a big running wide moment over the curb. That's what happens when you run wide at the top of the hill. You just dip a wheel onto the sand. Camaro gets spat sideways, recovers it, loses ground on the BMW, but crucially keeps hold of that third position. He's now kind of hindered slightly, the Camaro behind. That's giving a Mustang the opportunity around the outside. Mustang can't quite do it. Big slides from the white car in all of this as they head into the final complex. A big oversteer moment from the Camaro gives the Mustang a big tag. The Mustang does a really good job of keeping it out of the tyre bundle. The Camaro would then choose that opportunity to try and jump out of as much traffic as possible. The Mercedes would have a bit of a problem in the pit lane. The AI would drive the car into the wall, which would lose the Mercedes a fair chunk of time. An unfortunate game thing in all of that we can't do too much about. Good old Forza AIs and pitting. Maseratis were struggling a little bit with performance. They were not the fastest cars around this circuit. They were just about keeping up with the kind of the tail end of the pack, but this particular one was starting to come under pressure from one of the recovering Mustangs, and a little mistake, a little bit too late on the brakes, and sure enough, the Mustang would go flying past. It's better than having your outside wheel on the curb braking into that corner. Many a car has gone skating off into the gravel trap with doing that, but all it takes is a little mistake and those Mustangs are going to pounce. The Maserati now under an awful lot of pressure from a Camaro. I don't know if there was a bump. Certainly, the Camaro had a very close inspection of the rear of the Maserati, but is not quite close enough again to find a way past. The Maserati able to pull just a little bit of a margin through these next couple of corners as one of the Mustangs is kicking up a lot of smoke up ahead of them. Now, one of the recovering Mustangs, the red Mustang, took a very early pit stop to try and stay out of trouble. The blue and grey recovering Mustang pitted considerably later, as it would be the Maserati's turn to dive into the pit lane, and again a couple more cars coming with him. Everybody had so far up until now been spreading out their pit stops. Only really sort of 2 or 3 cars ever came at one time. We didn't have a big rush at any point. Tactically speaking, pretty good for everybody. Speaking of the recovering Mustang, as I said, the red car dove in the pits fairly early on, as did the red and white GTR. Again, the plan being get them out of fights, get them into clean air, and hope that they could make up some time. It worked to an extent. Certainly more so for the Ford in terms of catching back up. We saw the Mercedes have issues with their pit stop. They came out right fighting alongside the Camaro, and the Nissan would drop right in behind this group. The Mercedes had been running in second place. Now this was the fight for second and, well, yeah, second and fourth, essentially, as when they'd come into the pits. The Mercedes lost a little bit of ground, and he was now being caught by that GTR, by the Mustang. So, yeah, their early pit strategies had played out relatively well to their advantage. They'd got right up into the fight as they were now going to start going nose to tail. The Ford looking for a way to make up some more positions as I look up the inside in towards this fast left-hander, but is a little bit too tight. It's a little bit too much across the grass, loses a bit of time. The GTR would fend him off for, well, just about for now, as the Camaro would fend off the Mercedes. And this group would continue at it. As more cars further up pitted, they kept getting dropped out in and around this particular area. You see the Maserati coming out of the pit lane behind this group. One of the Mustangs would come out in front of this group. Camaro would get dumped out right into the middle of it. The Camaro on cold tyres here, having to try and fight with all sorts of cars. It gets swarmed. The GTR around the outside, the Mustangs up the inside, with the Camaro having just got out of the pits. The Ford spots an opportunity to find a way past the Nissan as we head into this turn 4. Again, that grip from the Mustang is incredible. He will be able to, well, he draws alongside. He's going to have to go the long way round into the next turn, and the Nissan manages to just hold on for now. The Mercedes, while a quick car, was being, well, struggling a little bit with all of the traffic that he was having to deal with at this time. The Ford's still looking for a way past that Nissan. They're side by side on the run up the hill. It's finally an opportunity for the Mustang, and he has got the position. The Nissan just not quite able to carry the speed there, and in fact the Nissan in a little bit of trouble now from one of the Camaros as they run down towards the hairpin once more. The Mustangs, despite the poor start, had made pretty good progress with their pit strategy in all of this. The Mercedes, the GTR here, had come a little bit unraveled, but the red car was, yes, certainly working his way back up through the order. And this was a big fight now going on for the lower parts of the podium. A few more cars further back were exiting the pit lane. The Camaro was trying desperately to keep hold of a podium position. The second of the Mustangs that got in trouble on the first lap would end up popping out of all of this in a third place. The blue and grey car right at the front of this group had been able to run in enough clear air to leapfrog this huge battle, because of course, as everybody got spat out into traffic, these guys had all started fighting and slowed each other down quite considerably. The Fords continuing to fight side by side through that turn 4. The red Mustang wanting to get involved in this fight. The Camaro with little in the way of Chevy help. The two Fords still side by side, almost out on to the grass and the gravel through all of that. That gives the Chevy an opportunity to fire up the inside. The Mercedes coming back to join in towards this group. The GTR's not that far behind. Unfortunately for the poor Camaro, gets the tiniest of nudges, but it's enough to see him go skating off across the gravel. Gets it back on the track nicely in behind the GTR, but it was a bit of a manic session going on here. There was another Camaro a little further back. Maserati was just about hanging on to the back of this group. The Mercedes at some point got himself a very big sideways moment, got dropped back further down this, this section, and it just couldn't get out of traffic. And that was one of the problems we saw. There were some fast cars in this that just get stuck in traffic, just trying to make progress forward. And this was the downside of the early pit strategy. While, yes, if you could get out and stay in clean air, you could make the most of all of the speed. If you, well, I say, even if you got out into clean air for your first couple of laps, if other cars came out, you know, if you had a problem with the pit stops, the AI bumped the car into the wall, for example, and you just get stuck in these groups, you just can't make the most of the speed that you had in the car. You can see the Mustangs gradually disappearing off into the distance. The Mercedes does a very good overtake to get past the Camaro through that first section of corners that the Chevy's fighting back towards the next turn. And of course, there's another Camaro lining up behind to try and find a way past. The Maserati's there just in case there is any sort of opportunity. But Chevy's right on the bumper of that Mercedes, the white and blue car, trying to go the long way round. Mercedes might have just managed to break that little, that little overtaking sail. It's just managed to get far enough away that the Camaro can't shove a nose up the inside. The Mercedes doesn't have to worry about defending at this particular moment in time. Now, the M4 led for a couple of laps and would dive in at the last possible opportunity to go for his pit stop. This was on lap 7 out of the 8-lap race. Now, he'd run around at the front relatively untroubled for some time, and unlike the other cars that had pitted earlier, was going to get spat out, well, with a lap to go. He wasn't expected to come out with the lead. The GTR was just too fast, as you see it come tearing past. But yeah, it was running in clean air while the Mustangs were fighting, while the Camaros, the Mercedes were all fighting. And the BMW, well, he tries to get up to speed. You can just see the Mustangs come across the start-finish line. They are heading down towards this first corner at a serious amount of speed. But the BMW would beat them out. Great tactical decisions from the M4 here to end up with that second place by staying out till the last possible moment, keeping his car in clean air. Definitely the way to go. At the front, it was again another great tactical decision for the Nissan. That early pit stop paying off very well. A mighty quick car as well, of course. Was able to once again make the most of the clean air. Didn't get stuck in any traffic at any point, and unlike the Mercedes that had suffered trying to recover a little bit, the Nissan was just a bit too fast and hadn't had any troubles whatsoever. So it would be the GTR that would go on to take victory in this modern day Group 5 recreation, if you will, and in many ways a fairly lonely victory. The GTR not really seeing very much in the way of competition. Good for lap speed, perhaps less good for for excitement. Second place, well, that was far from a foregone conclusion. We saw the BMW managing to just about skate out in front of the rabid horde of Fords that were coming for that second. And while the Nissan was circling around on his own to go and take that victory, the BMW was going to have a lot of defending to do from the Mustangs at the further back, get connected almost. One went across the grass, I think. It's a great little dummy from the Mustang here as he tries desperately to get the car stopped into the hairpin. He just asked a bit too much of it. Runs too deep. A lovely cutback from the BMW as well to regain that second place. And the Fords are running out of chance. The third and fourth place cars had swapped places so much in this last lap that they were slowing each other down, not really able to do much about getting their way past the BMW as they head into the final chicane. The Mustang really is out of time to find a way past. The BMW very defensive. The Fords all nose to tail as they head into the final corner. It's now just the drag race. The BMW gets a big slide. He would not have been wanting that. Will the Fords be able to power their way past? Not quite. It was close. It was close, and they threw everything at that BMW in the final lap, but they couldn't quite do it. Excellent tactical decisions from the M4 to keep himself out of trouble for as long as possible out of traffic, and he would manage to beat the three Mustangs. The Mustangs claiming third, fourth, and fifth. A really good job from two of those Mustangs to have recovered from that first corner incident. The Fords were mighty fast around this particular circuit. So yeah, that was second, third, fourth, and fifth. Sixth would go to the Nissan, followed by the Mercedes. The best of the Maseratis would be up in 8th place. Maseratis struggled. They did struggle a little bit around this circuit. They just weren't quite as competitive as some of the other cars. One did get involved in a little shunt for later down the race, but yeah, on the whole, the Maseratis were a little bit too slow. They're apparently quite nice cars to drive, but they just weren't particularly fast around the corners. My Mercedes, well, that was pretty garbage. I'll be honest. It wasn't my finest bit of building. It wasn't my finest bit of driving either, I'll hold my hands up and say. When I was starting to struggle a little bit with pace, I was then overdriving the car, making silly little errors, and it just, yeah. Combined the car not being great and me not driving great, and I spent most of the time at the back. The Mercedes was capable of being fast. We saw one. While he got unlucky with pit problems and traffic, it could have been running up towards the podium spots, but yeah, my one was not that fast. In terms of a class of racing, if it was something that we moved forward with, there would certainly be some balance adjustments to some of the cars. While the Camaros, the M4, the other Mercedes, and so on, and to an extent the GTRs as well, all were fairly close together in terms of lap speed. The Mustangs were very quick. The Mustangs were very, very quick indeed, and they would probably have to be detuned slightly. They were the best cars through the corners and pretty similar to everything else in terms of straight line speed. You know, that's yeah, they weren't hindered by their lack of straight line speed. They weren't hindered very much by that, and they were very, very quick then through the corners. So they would probably need a little bit of a nerve. Likewise, the Maseratis would need help, because just overall pace from Maseratis in all areas just wasn't quite good enough from those cars. It didn't turn out too badly, though. And I think visually-wise, looks-wise, not too bad. It can't quite ever get as extreme as silhouette cars, you know, when I'm limited by Forza, but yeah, I think it wasn't too bad whatsoever. That, though, is going to be it from me. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.